A big pattern change is coming for a good chunk of the central and eastern two-thirds of the U.S., while much of the West Coast experiences those hot conditions and even some record-breaking temperatures over the next 7 days. So we're going to break down the details for you in this update. You can take a look at the overall 500 millibar, and we've got that pretty much dominating ridge of high pressure that's just been inundating a good chunk of the desert Southwest, with that record heat still continuing for them. But the trough inversion is pretty prevalent and kind of rare for this time of year, especially for late July standards. We're going to be entering a setup called northwest flow, and that's going to be a cooler flow, especially for those areas across the central and eastern two-thirds. And much of the Great Lakes are experiencing some of those cooler anomalies this morning, and that cooler air will continue to shift further south and eventually actually making it all the way down into the Gulf Coast states. So let's take a look at the setup on the satellite picture. We do have some showers and instability draped across that cool front, especially for those areas across Oklahoma in and around the Kansas region, getting into Missouri. We also have some bubble up showers and thunderstorms in the heat of the afternoon that will be inundating a good chunk of the southeastern areas as well. But if you take a look at the tropics, it kind of remains pretty quiet out there. We only have some convection in and around the Jamaica region, portions of the Dominican Republic. But for right now, it's pretty much high and dry as far as the tropics go, because we do have a lot of Saharan dust that's been really inundating a good part of the Atlantic basin. Obviously, we had Beryl that was so unusual and so rare for such early on in the season. Now that that has subsided, all the Saharan dust has replaced much of the Atlantic, the main development region, and getting into a good chunk of the Caribbean, even into the Gulf of Mexico. And some of that Saharan dust has actually snuck into areas across the deep south, especially for areas into Florida, back into the Texas region. They're seeing some of that Saharan dust, but that's typically what is kind of shutting down the Atlantic basin, at least for now, along with some increased wind shear. And even if you take a look at the overall ensemble guidance for the next 10 days, right? High and dry, there's actually no ensembles hinting at any tropical development whatsoever. So definitely enjoy the calmer period while we have it. So, but because it doesn't look to continue, because if we look at some of the longer range guidance, and this is typically what happens as we go into the month of August, we typically have that Saharan dust likely going to subside. Some of the wind shear kind of relaxes, and we have a little bit more higher probability of seeing tropical development. So as we head into that first week of August, there we see kind of an above average capability of some of those producing a possible tropical activity. So we'll be looking all eyes as we head into that first week of August down there into the Caribbean for our next potential, at least tropical development. And of course, as we get deeper to the August, typically as we head into August 15th through October 15th, those 60 days, that's usually prime time activity. So definitely enjoy the respite while we have it, because we are expecting a well above average tropical season. So, but further to the United States, it's all about the heat out west. You can definitely see it better on the 850 millibar. That's about 5,000 feet up in the atmosphere. So that has some cooler air aloft, and that's actually sinking to the surface. And some of those areas are experiencing really pleasant morning conditions. And even in the afternoon, a lot of these areas don't even heat back up into the, even into the 80s. So a good part of the Great Lakes and much of the Ohio Valley is experiencing those 80-degree temperatures for highs. And that will only sink a little bit further south, especially as we get into deeper into the weekend and head into early next week. So for today, it's all about where the cooler air is and the cold front that's going to be draped across a good part of the Texas Panhandle in and around the Oklahoma region, portions of Kansas. We are expecting some gusty winds that are likely going to be set up with this activity. It's just a marginal threat for those areas across eastern portions of Colorado, getting into New Mexico, and that would enter portions of the Texas Panhandle, and a good chunk of this activity across Mississippi, as well as into Alabama Alabama, getting into Georgia, as well as into the Carolinas, going into Florida and up the East Coast. This is not going to be severe. This is just some showers and thunderstorm activity kind of heating up in the heat of the afternoon. But man, it is all about this significant trough that's really going to be setting up across a good part of the central U.S. as the heat will expand across the west. And these areas across the central U.S. will only actually get a little bit cooler as that low pressure center and as the trough will continue to sink further south, and the northwest flow is eventually going to drift it all the way down into the deep south. So yes, we're talking a good part of Texas and Louisiana and a good part of Mississippi and Alabama and Georgia. You know, all those areas are going to experiencing those cooler anomalies, especially as we head into early next week. And with that cooler air, it comes with kind of an overrunning setup. You can actually see where the cool front will actually stall out, and where it stalls, obviously right along that cool front is going to be your higher probability of rainfall with this activity. This is not typically severe activity. This is just some showers and thunderstorms, lightning induced, some gusty winds, and you can't roll out tapping into some of that heat. Before that, could be looking at some microbursts that could set up in this situation. But we do have some monsoonal flow, that's some beneficial rains into at least portions of Arizona, but especially into New Mexico, getting down there into Texas, and eventually heading all the way up into the East Coast for those areas across the Carolinas. And again, as we head into Tuesday, and that cooler air just sinks a little bit further south, and the cool front stalls across this region. So it's going to be tapping into that Gulf moisture. So for those areas across central and southern and eastern 2/3 of Texas gets inundated with some showers and thunderstorms. And it's really across this boundary where all the elevated lift is going to be associated with it, and predominantly going to get most of the showers and thunderstorm activity. And man, look, as we head into Tuesday, you can actually see where the record high temperatures will be unfolding. And it's really mainly across the west. While some of these areas, especially like in Phoenix and Las Vegas, I was looking at some of the data this morning. Not only have they been experiencing record high temperatures, they've experienced record, minimum temperatures at night. It's really not cooling off. So combining that for summer already halfway through, Phoenix and Vegas are already experiencing their warmest summer on record since records began. And some areas across Sacramento, Fresno, Bakersfield, those are all areas as well into California that's also experiencing their all-time record hottest summer on record so far to date. But man, look what stands out across a good part of the central U.S. Man, it's just nothing but nice weather. It's hard pressed, because once you get into July 23rd, folks, that's typically as we enter the hottest portions of the year. So but that between now and the middle of August, that is usually those next couple of weeks, the hottest time of the year. So when you take a good chunk of the U.S. and see some of those widespread 80s drifting all the way from the Great Lakes to the Ohio Valley, a good part of the Tennessee Valley, drifting all the way down into the south and even into the Gulf Coast states, producing 87 degrees there. That's very unusual for this time of year. So definitely enjoy it. And it's not just going to be a one-day wonder. It's going to be lasting for an extended period of time, if not almost 7 days for a good part to this area. Likely going to be below average. So it's going to be feeling really nice considering it's late July standards. But yes, the dominating ridge is only going to get a little bit more prevalent as we get into Wednesday. It's going to be locked over those regions of Vegas and Phoenix. There you're going to be experiencing those more record heat, and the heat dome will expand. Yes, those areas into Idaho, Montana, even portions of Canada will actually experience some triple-digit heat as we head into Wednesday. But look where the troughing inversion is. That's when it finally makes it to the Gulf Coast states, and some of those areas along the Gulf Coast will start to enter those cooler anomalies as we head into Wednesday. And I think it even only amplifies going into Thursday with those 5, 10, if not almost 15 degrees below average temperatures will drift all the way down into the deep south and actually even to much of Florida And where the stalled frontal boundary drapes across, that's where the rain showers will be. So for Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, that stalled frontal boundary really doesn't go anywhere. So it keeps the showers and thunderstorms alive in a lot of the same places, from essentially Texas all the way to really into Maine, where that stalled frontal boundary will be draped across that region and points southbound. That's where most of the instability will be. And of course, you got the ridge of high pressure going to be dominating for those other areas across a good part of the West, the Pacific Northwest, and eventually the northern tier of the U.S. will be getting hot in a big way. So if you break it down over the next 7 days, this is kind of what it looks like. So between now and next Friday, we still have that ridge of high pressure is going to be pretty much dominating a good part of the Southwest, much of the West Coast, the Pacific Northwest, British Columbia. Some of numerous records will likely fall, and there's the chillier, cooler air for July standards taking over a good part of the central and southern half of the U.S., especially the southeast as well. So definitely enjoy that time period. And also where that cool front is going to stall out, that's where you're going to have the overrunning type setups for several days. So definitely some well above average rains are going to be impacting a good chunk of the deep south and much of the southeast, and you'll have some lighter amounts with that northwest flow coming in for those northern regions. But beyond that, I do feel the pattern beyond 7 days, once we head into next weekend, it's going to change a little bit, especially as that ridge of high pressure will start to shift further eastbound. So now we're talking areas as we get into next weekend, likely into the Dakotas, back into Minnesota, much of the upper Great Lakes, and a good part of the Northeast, and especially the New England region, will likely see a lot of heat building across that region as that ridge of high pressure will be expanding and amplifying over your area. And further south, the trough will get shrunk even further, as much of the U.S. by the time we head into next weekend into the first couple of days of August, that heat will likely expand from west to east and kind of take over the U.S. And definitely that those cooler anomalies will be a distant wonder by then. So guys, I appreciate you guys watching. Do like this video, definitely hit the subscribe button, and catch me next update while I protect you before and after the storm.